Cassie, child, wake up now," Big Ma called gently as the new sun peeked over the horizon. I looked sleepily at my grandmother and closed my eyes again. "Cassie, get up, girl." This time the voice was not so gentle. I jumped out of the deep feathery bed as Big Ma climbed from the other side. The room was still dark, and I stubbed my toe while stumbling sleepily about looking for my clothes. "Shoot, darn old chair," I fussed, rubbing my injured foot. "Hush, Cassie, and open them curtains if you can't see," Big Ma said. "Prop that window open, too, and let some of that fresh morning air in here." I opened the window and looked outside. The earth was draped in a cloak of gray mist as the sun chased the night away. The cotton stalks, which in another hour would glisten greenly toward the sun, were gray. The ripening corn, wrapped in jackets of emerald and gold, was gray. Even the rich brown Mississippi earth was gray. Only the trees of the forest were not gray. They stood dark, almost black, across the dusty road, still holding the night. A soft breeze stirred, and their voices whispered down to me in a song of morning greeting. "Cassie girl," I said, "open the window, not standing there gazing out all morning. Now get moving before I take something to you," Big Ma threatened. I dashed to my clothes. Before Big Ma had unwoven her long braid of gray hair, my pants and shirt were on, and I was hurrying into the kitchen. A small kerosene lamp was burning in a corner as I entered. Its light reflected on 7-year-old Christopher John, short, pudgy, and a year younger than me, sitting sleepily upon a side bench, drinking a large glass of clabber milk. Mama's back was to me. She was dipping flour from a near-empty canister, while my older brother, Stacy, built a fire in the huge iron belly stove. "I don't know what I'm going to do with you, Christopher John," Mama scolded, "getting up in the middle of the night and eating all that cornbread. Didn't you have enough to eat before you went to bed?" "Yes'm," Christopher John murmured. "Lord knows I don't want any of my babies going hungry, but times are hard, honey. Don't you know folks all around here in Mississippi are struggling? Children crying because they got no food to eat, and their daddies crying because they can't get jobs so they can feed their babies, and you getting up in the middle of the night stuffing yourself with cornbread?" Her voice softened as she looked at the sleepy little boy. "Baby, we're in a depression. Why do you think Papa's way down in Louisiana laying tracks on the railroad? So his children can eat, but only when they're hungry. You understand?" "Yes'm," Christopher John murmured again as his eyes slid blissfully shut. "Morning, Mama," I chimed. "Morning, baby," Mama said. "You wash up yet?" "No, ma'am." "Then go wash up and call little man again. Tell him he's not dressing to meet President Roosevelt this morning. Hurry up now, 'cause I want you to set the table." Little man, a very small 6-year-old and a most finicky dresser, was brushing his hair when I entered the room he shared with Stacy and Christopher John. His blue pants were faded, but except for a small grass stain on one knee, they were clean. Outside of his Sunday pants, these were the only pants he had, and he was always careful to keep them in the best condition possible. But one look at him and I knew that he was far from pleased with their condition this morning. He frowned down at the spot for a moment, then continued brushing. "Man, hurry up and get dressed," I called. "Mama said you ain't dressing to meet the president." "See you there," he said, pointing at the stain. "You did that." "I did no such thing. You fell all by yourself." "You tripped me." "Didn't. Did too." "Hey, cut it out, you two," ordered Stacy, entering the room. "You fought over that stupid stain yesterday. Now get moving, both of you. We gotta go pick blackberries before the sun gets too high. Little man, you go gather the eggs while Christopher John and me milk the cows." Little man and I decided to settle our dispute later when Stacy wasn't around. With Papa away, 11-year-old Stacy thought of himself as the man of the house, and Mama had instructed little man, Christopher John, and me to mind him. So like it or not, we humored him. Besides, he was bigger than we were. I ran to the back porch to wash. When I returned to the kitchen, Mama was talking to Big Ma. "We got about enough flour for 2 more meals," Mama said, cutting the biscuit dough. "Our salt and sugar are practically down to nothing, and..." She stopped when she saw me. "Cassie, baby, go gather the eggs for Mama." "Little man's gathering the eggs." "Then go help him." "But I ain't set the table yet." "Set it when you come back." I knew that I was not wanted in the kitchen. I looked suspiciously at my mother and grandmother, then went to the back porch to get a basket. Big Ma's voice drifted through the open window. Mary, you ought to write David and tell him somebody done opened his letter and stole that $10 he sent. No, Mama, David's got enough on his mind. Besides, there's enough garden food so we won't go hungry. But what about your medicine? You're all out of it, and the doctor told you good to... Shh! Mama stared at the window. Cassie, I thought I told you to go gather those eggs. I had to get a basket, Mama. I hurried off the porch and ran to the barn. After breakfast, when the sun was streaking red across the sky, my brothers and I ambled into the coolness of the forest, leading our 3 cows and their calves down the narrow cow path to the pond. The morning was already muggy, but the trees closed out the heat as their leaves waved restlessly high above our heads. Good morning, Mr. Trees, I shouted. They answered me with a soft, swooshing sound. Hear 'em, Stacy? Hear 'em singing? Ah, cut that out, Cassie. Them trees ain't singing. How many times I got to tell you that's just the wind? He stopped at a sweet alligator gum, pulled out his knife, and scraped off a glob of gum that had seeped through its cracked bark. He handed me half. As I stuffed the gooey wad into my mouth, I patted the tree and whispered, Thank you, Mr. Gum Tree. Stacy frowned at me, then looked back at Christopher John and Little Man walking far behind us, munching on their breakfast biscuits. Man, Christopher John, come on now, he yelled. If we finish the berry picking early, we can go wading before we go back. Christopher John and Little Man ran to catch up with us. Then, resuming their leisurely pace, they soon fell behind again. A large gray squirrel scurried across our path and up a walnut tree. I watched until it was settled amidst the tree's feather-like leaves. Then, poking one of the calves, I said, Stacy, is Mama sick? Sick? Why you say that? Because I heard Big Ma asking her about some medicine she's supposed to have. Stacy stopped, a worried look on his face. If she's sick, she ain't bad sick, he decided. If she was bad sick, she'd be in bed. We left the cows at the pond and, taking our berry baskets, delved deeper into the forest looking for the wild blackberry bushes. I see one, I shouted. Where? Cried Christopher John, eager for the sweet berries. Over there. Last one, too. It's a rotten egg, I yelled, and off I ran. Stacy and Little Man followed at my heels, but Christopher John puffed far behind. Hey, wait for me, he cried. Let's hide from Christopher John, Stacy suggested. The 3 of us ran in different directions. I plunged behind a giant old pine and hugged its warm trunk as I waited for Christopher John. Christopher John puffed to a stop, then, looking all around, called, Hey, Stacy, Cassie, hey, man, y'all cut that out. I giggled, and Christopher John heard me. I see you, Cassie, he shouted, starting toward me as fast as his chubby legs would carry him. You're it. Not till you tag me, I laughed. As I waited for him to get closer, I glanced up into the boughs of my wintry-smelling hiding tree, expecting a song of laughter. But the old pine only tapped me gently with one of its long, low branches. I turned from the tree and dashed away. You can't catch me, I taunted, dodging from one beloved tree to the next. Around the shaggy bark hickories and the sharp needle pines, past blue-gray beeches and sturdy black walnuts, I sailed, while my laughter resounded through the ancient forest, filling every chink. Overhead, the boughs of the giant trees hovered protectively, but they did not join in my laughter. Deeper into the forest I plunged. Christopher John, unable to keep up, plopped on the ground in a pant. Little Man and Stacy, emerging from their hiding places, ran up to him. Ain't you caught her yet, Little Man demanded, more than a little annoyed. He can't catch the champ, I boasted, stopping to rest against a hickory tree. I slid my back down the tree's shaggy trunk and looked up at its long branches, heavy with sweet nuts and slender green leaves, perfectly still. I looked around the leaves of the other trees. They were still also. I stared at the trees, aware of an eerie silence descending over the forest. Stacy walked toward me. What's the matter with you, Cassie? He asked. The trees, Stacy, I said softly. They ain't singing no more. Is that all? He looked up at the sky. Come on, y'all, it's getting late. We better get them berries. He turned and walked on. But Stacy, listen. Little Man, Christopher John, listen. The forest echoed an uneasy silence. The wind just stopped blowing, that's all, said Stacy. Now stop fooling around and come on. I jumped up to follow Stacy, then cried, Stacy, look! On a black oak a few yards away was a huge white X. How did that get there? I exclaimed, running to the tree. There's another one, little man screamed. I see one too, shouted Christopher John. Stacy said nothing as Christopher John, little man, and I ran wildly through the forest, counting the ghost-like marks. Stacy, they're on practically all of them, I said when he called us back. Why? Stacy studied the trees and suddenly pushed us down. My clothes, little man wailed indignantly. Hush, man, and stay down, Stacy warned. Somebody's coming. Two white men emerged. We looked at each other. We knew to be silent. You marked them all down here, one of the men asked. Not the younger ones, Mr. Anderson. We might need them too, said Mr. Anderson, counting the X's. But don't worry about marking them now, Tom. We'll get them later. Also them trees up past the pond toward the house. The old woman agreed to you cutting these trees? I ain't been down there yet, Mr. Anderson said. Mr. Anderson, Tom hesitated a moment, looked up at the silent trees and back at Mr. Anderson. Maybe you should go easy with them, he cautioned. You know that David can be as mean as an old jackass when he want to be. He's talking about Papa, I whispered. Stacy hissed. Mr. Anderson looked uneasy. What's that got to do with anything? Well, he just don't take much to any dealings with white folks. Again, Tom looked up at the trees. He ain't afraid like some. Mr. Anderson laughed weakly. Don't worry about that, Tom. The land belongs to his mama. He don't have no say in it. Besides, I guess I ought to know how to handle David Logan. After all, there are ways. Now, you get back to my place and get some boys and start chopping down these trees, Mr. Anderson said. I'll go talk to the old woman. He looked up at the sky. We can almost get a full day's work in if we hurry. Mr. Anderson turned to walk away, but Tom stopped him. Mr. Anderson, you really going to chop all the trees? If I need to, these folks ain't got no call for them. I do. I got me a good contract for these trees, and I aim to fulfill it. Tom watched Mr. Anderson walk away, then, looking sorrowfully up at the trees, he shook his head and disappeared into the depths of the forest. What are we going to do, Stacy? I asked anxiously. They can't just cut down our trees, can they? I don't know. Papa's gone. Stacy muttered to himself, trying to decide what we should do next. Boy, if Papa was here, them old white men wouldn't be messing with our trees, little man declared. Yeah, Christopher John agreed. Just let Papa get a hold of 'em, and he gonna turn 'em every which way but loose. Christopher John, man, Stacy said finally, go get the cows and take them home. But we just brought them down here, little man protested. And we gotta pick the berries for dinner, said Christopher John mournfully. No time for that now. Hurry up and stay clear of them white men. Cassie, you come with me. We ran, brown legs and feet flying high through the still forest. By the time Stacy and I arrived at the house, Mr. Anderson's car was already parked in the dusty drive. Mr. Anderson himself was seated comfortably in Papa's rocker on the front porch. Big Ma was seated too, but Mama was standing. Stacy and I eased quietly to the side of the porch unnoticed. $65. That's an awful lot of money in these hard times, Aunt Caroline, Mr. Anderson was saying to Big Ma. I could see Mama's thin face harden. You know, Mr. Anderson said, rocking familiarly in Papa's chair, that's more than David can send home in 2 months. We do quite well on what David sends home, Mama said coldly. Mr. Anderson stopped rocking. I suggest you encourage Aunt Caroline to sell them trees, Mary. You know, David might not always be able to work so good. He could possibly have an accident. Big Ma's soft brown eyes clouded over with fear as she looked first at Mr. Anderson, then at Mama. But Mama clenched her fists and said, In Mississippi, black men do not have accidents. Hush, child, hush, Big Ma said hurriedly. How many trees for $65, Mr. Anderson? Enough, till I figure I got my $65 worth. And how many would that be, Mama persisted. Mr. Anderson looked haughtily at Mama. I said I'd be the judge of that, Mary. I think not, Mama said. Mr. Anderson stared at Mama, and Mama stared back at him. I knew Mr. Anderson didn't like that, but Mama did it anyway. Mr. Anderson soon grew uneasy under that piercing glaze, and when his eyes swiftly shifted from Mama to Big Ma, his face was beet red. Caroline, he said, his voice low and menacing, you're the head of this family, and you got a decision to make. Now, I need them trees, and I mean to have them. I offered you a good price for them, and I ain't going to haggle over it. I know y'all can use the money. Doc Thomas tells me that Mary's not well.